This week on Deeper Cuts, Chris Carell is going to be filling in for me. He interviewed FEGA and Colt Master Engraver Layne Zuelke while he was working on a ring with some scrolls. Let's go check it out and get to know him a little bit better. Let's get to work.
Layne, thanks for taking the time to sit down and talk with us today, go through, answer some different questions about the engraving world.
Absolutely.
First question I want to ask is, what were your biggest roadblocks coming up?
When I started cutting, I was a young jeweler's apprentice, and there was very little information out there, and there was very little sharing of information. I was lucky that right about that time, Sam Alfano had developed one of the first websites. And this is early internet days, so he really went out of his way to create something for engravers. But engravers just didn't want to share information. I guess they felt threatened and thought you were going to take their work. So we were kind of on our own, learning by the School of Hard Knocks, which in one way is good. I learned how not to do things, and I learned what all the mistakes you can make are, so I think it makes me a decent teacher. But yeah, it was a little tough. I think it took me 10 years to learn what a modern student today could learn in 2. So.
That follows one of the questions that I wanted to ask, which is, why do you give so much of your time away for free on Facebook, the forums? It seems like you're one of the first people to post very constructive advice. You take the time to pull people's drawings in and critique, design and those kind of things. Does that have a lot to do with that?
There was nobody to help me when I started out. And engraving is one of the toughest things in the world to do, one of the hardest things to master. And there's just so much information that has to be absorbed, and there aren't very many places to get it. And so, as hard as it is to learn to cut, to learn to draw, I figure every beginner needs every advantage they can get and all the help they can get from the beginning. And not everybody, lives in an area where they have access to a mentor or access to classes. And so the only information that they're getting might be coming from some of those forums. So I'm all too happy to, pitch in and help where I can.
That's awesome. That's really cool. In talking about clients, I think one of the interesting things that I heard, I can't remember who, maybe it was Sam, is one of the biggest obstacles for new engravers is the fact that they're not willing to say no to projects. Will you kind of expound on that topic of saying no to a paying job and client?
How do you mean say no? As in getting yourself in trouble, or?
As in, is the material too hard? Is it beyond your skill set? Somebody comes, how many people walk up and say, hey, I want my Glock engraved?
Sure.
You know what I mean? So people get themselves in
That's a great example.
A world of trouble.
Yeah.
Because, it's finally their opportunity to take a paying client. So they're going to take what walks through the door, much to their dismay and potentially the loss of funds. So. And
I've seen it happen multiple times with some pretty darn good engravers who, knew their stuff and were fantastic artists, yet just didn't have the experience with the materials that they were about to work with. And engraving Glocks is a perfect example of that, because you get people that are learning on their own and they're kind of in a vacuum. They don't have a mentor, and they just assume a gun is a gun is a gun. And then they find out really quickly after they scratch this thing up that this gun they're trying to cut is actually harder than the tools that they're trying to cut it with. And now they're in trouble. They've got to go and either replace parts or replace a gun. So it happens, and that boils down to experience. You know, if you don't have somebody showing the ropes, you're going to make mistakes. Hopefully they're not big ones. And with experience, you slowly learn what you can and cannot get away with. And yeah, the Glock is a great example of that.
On the topic of the vacuum, I think it's interesting and not talked about much how lonely it is to be a professional full-time engraver. A lot of hours in the studio by yourself. You want to kind of talk about what that looks like for you, how you overcome that, maybe you enjoy it, you know, what does that look like? How do you kind of get out of the loneliness of the microscope sometimes?
No doubt it's a solitary trade. In my case, and I highly encourage systems like this, I work in a shop of other jewelers, and we kind of run a co-op where we've got jewelers around us that do repairs, we've got jewelers that do custom work, and I'm the only engraver in the shop. So we've got a little camaraderie. We all have our own individual studios, but we stop and we eat lunch together, things like that. Now, I know a lot of guys that they do work strictly alone, and they like it. I mean, they enjoy the solitude. I think this type of art form lends itself to somebody who enjoys solitude. And you know, you have to be a little wacky to do this kind of work anyway, because we spend half our lives staring through a microscope, being still, or you know, sussing out artwork in a quiet place without much interaction with other people. So yeah, it takes that kind of person to get into this sort of a trade in the first place.
Another thing I feel like doesn't get talked about a bunch, and I have a bunch of questions around this, is the best ways for an intermediate level engraver to make money. They don't necessarily have a full portfolio yet. You know, they're proficient enough to be able to start taking them. What does that look like?
There's never been a better time for them, actually. And you know, there's a lot more work than there used to be. It's funny that one of the things that some of the old timers, they were scared of people taking their work, and so they didn't share the information. There were very few engravers out there, and the reality is that the art form nearly died because of it. You know, standards started dropping off. Nobody knew, you know, they were working on their own. There's not much knowledge out there. A funny thing happened when engraving hit social media, and we started to see more and more people interested in it. The artwork got better and people started producing really amazing work. Now we've got people seeing that work online and they're interested in purchasing it. So, you know, because of the number of engravers we've got out there, because of the visibility of engraving in the marketplace, there's more demand for hand engraving than ever before. And so because of that, you've got demand at all levels. And one of the things I tell, especially in gun engravers, since that's my specialty, I tell younger engravers that if you can engrave $2,000 to $3,000 guns, you'll have work stacked in your safe for years. You know, most of the work that I do is pretty high-end work, you know, that projects take 2 or 3 months a piece, but that's really stressful work. And you know, you get paid at the end of it all, so you have to go long periods without money. So you have to, you know, be fairly well organized in your business, whereas there's more demand than ever for smaller jobs like the $2,000 guns or the $300 knives. So, you know, the beginner that can market himself and make himself seen, and there's more opportunities for that than ever with social media, those guys, you know, there's no shortage of work out there, and you can make a decent living.
That's really good advice. I think the general idea of competition is a great thing. We see it in on the tool side, you know, on the artist side, but everybody is playing a part in terms of educating the customer, and that grows the market for all of us, whether it's people that are getting interested in buying the art, you know, getting into learning how to engrave.
Absolutely.
people out there teaching classes. So I think all that's really great.
Absolutely.
On that same topic, why is there not more information publicly out there about pricing work?
I never quite understood that, and I think that's common in the art world in general. You know, rarely do you see somebody who does oil paintings post stock pricing for their work. And it might be because the work that we do is so varied as far as time frame goes, but you know, sometimes they're embarrassed to, you know, put out what they're charging.
Sure.
That's not uncommon. Whether it's because you don't charge enough and you're embarrassed because of that, or you think you charge too much and you're embarrassed because of that. So it's not uncommon. I do think that the engravers who are willing to post general pricing on their websites and such, I think they get a better response because it at least gives the potential customer an idea of what to expect. Whereas if you don't post pricing, it's kind of one of those if I have to ask, I can't afford it things. And so I think it behooves an engraver who's just getting into business to at least post some kind of general pricing structure. You know, whether it's just an hourly rate that they can discuss later on, or you know, samples with prices on them.
So after being a FEGA Master, Colt Master, 25 years engraving, you've talked about learning from your students, even basic students.
Absolutely.
What does some of that look like, and what are some of your biggest takeaways from learning from your students?
So once again, it goes back to me having learned in a vacuum. I learned the hard way of doing things. I learned what did work and what didn't work. I think that makes me a better teacher because I want my students to, you know, to get into this as quickly as they can, to, you know, to get into cutting as quickly as they can, and to gain some proficiency with the tools as quickly as they can. And so I can look back at my mistakes and, you know, kind of help them avoid some of the pitfalls. And what happens is I spend a lot of one-on-one time with those students, and I see them using techniques that I wouldn't have thought of. It might be wrong, but it might be right. It just might be something that I've never seen before. And you know, it makes me rethink either the way I do something, or it makes me rethink the way I teach something. So it's kind of refreshing, you know, from the a rank beginner up to some of the, you know, guys who have been at this for much longer, the guys and girls who are, you know, professionals at it but are coming to me for a specific class. I tend to learn a little bit of something each and every class. It is refreshing.
In talking about how long Scrollwork's been around and, you know, trying to make something your own, where is the line, and this is constantly discussed, but where's the line between influence, copy, and some kind of artistic uniqueness?
That's one of the toughest questions in the engraving world to answer, because, you know, a simple scroll can be drawn a million different ways. And so how do you create something that hasn't been done before? Because just about everything here has been done before. You know, whether you're plagiarizing it or not, you might think you're creating something on your own, but the reality is that it's something you saw somewhere else and just forgot you ever saw it. So, you know, I think it boils down to what do you know in your heart that you're doing when you're creating this work. And one of the ways that I avoided it was I would study other people's work, and I would spend a lot of time seeing what worked in their designs and what didn't work, what I liked and what I didn't like. And then rather than looking at their work as I was drawing my own, I would put away all references to scroll work that I had. And I would start drawing from memory and drawing on my own. And it meant that it took me a lot longer to develop something that was viable, to develop something that I thought was nice. But when I finally did, it sort of became recognizable as my own. Now, I don't do the most complicated work. Most of what I do is really pretty simple, and that's okay with me. What I like is when I hear somebody say, you know, I recognize that it was your work immediately as soon as I saw it. Then I know I'm doing something right. That's what gives me satisfaction. I don't have to do the most complicated work. I don't have to do the most complex, but I want to do what I do right, cut it cleanly, and make it beautiful and within my limits.
What is the future of the industry look like?
I say it everywhere I go. When I do trade shows and people approach us and look at the work we're doing, one of the things I hear most often is that, you know, this is a dying art. And I have to tell them that it's a dying art because you don't see it in your daily life, but the reality is that we're having the biggest engraving renaissance in the history of this art form. And it's because of the sharing of information. I mean, it's simply because of that. You know, engraving was hidden behind closed doors for so many years, and it kind of stagnated. These days, we've got a whole new group of artists who are bringing a whole new sensibility to it, a whole new, you know, eye for design, doing things that have never been done before, making art objects that have never been done before that include hand engraving. So I think we're in one of the best times ever to become an engraver, and it's truly in the middle of an engraving renaissance.
I have some rapid fire questions for you now.
Oh boy.
This is a nice new segment that I've never let Molly do. So just whatever the first answer that comes to your head, we can edit if we have to. But first question, does pineapple belong on pizza?
Absolutely not.
My man.
Fruit and meat do not mix.
Cutting letters with a flat or a 120?
Both. Depends on the time, depends on the situation.
Your favorite smell?
My favorite smell. Oh, that's a good one. Barbecue.
Nice. Favorite meal?
Favorite meal would have to be seafood gumbo.
My man. Off the top of your head, how many guns have you engraved?
Probably 30 guns. Not a lot.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Your favorite go-to graver?
My favorite go-to graver is a 120. I use it for 90% of my work.
Material?
Favorite material is mild steel or a good carbon steel gun.
Nice. Biggest mistake beginner engravers make?
Biggest mistake beginner engravers make. You know, that deserves a little bit more time. Thinking that beginner engravers that imagine that cutting is the most important thing in engraving, when it is not. Cutting is just like using a pencil, but what do you do with it? That's the important thing.
Favorite song to engrave to, not necessarily favorite song.
Favorite song. I don't have a favorite song, but I have a favorite genre, and that's old school country.
Very nice. Very nice. Layne, that's all I have for you, man. I appreciate you taking the time to come through.
Absolutely.
Look through the scope, chat with me, and yeah, man, I loved it.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.